I'll call this meeting of Capital Program Committee to order. It's just after 3 on May 30th. Believe it or not, June is right around the corner. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Let's see. On your motion, Christie?
Aye.
Howard?
Yeah,
Brooke?
Aye.
Thank you, appreciate it. And I'm an aye. We're here today to address, continue to address the capital program software enhancements. And to that end, there we go. Screen share. And share. Sorry, just getting set up here. Oh. All right, so just a quick, we've covered all the ones, those have been submitted to finance. Twos will be going in Monday. The yellows we covered at the last meeting, with the exception of some follow-ups. I want to see if we can address now that I've had an opportunity to take a breath. We talked about, just one thing I want to point out, and I think we can decide this as a full board. We don't have to decide this today, but if we're going to have these line items, which are currently in as ops high required, medium recommended, and low elective, which we're going to change, I'll get to in a moment. But if we're going to have those, that the subordinate. So for instance, what we've been doing is if it's high and it's a 10 points evaluation, medium is automatically captured within that, and low is captured within that. What I mean by that is they automatically become 100. Now that we've changed we're going to change these line items, I think that it's less, the rationale for that approach doesn't really make sense. But as such, we just need to be aware that overall, relative to past years, the score is going to be lower. It's going to be lower for, basically this category is the highest overall ranking category. And these line items represent the highest potential points that you can score. So it's not that from a year-to-year comparison, requests scored in the coming fiscal year will be, they'll be lower by the percentage of not having included these two subordinate values. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's just for, I think, just for us to be aware of. It's just going to be the nature of the beast. Schedule replacement. The one I wanted to cover is we talked about, let's see, change to plan replacement. I suggest you guys, we change that to replacement accounted for within the capital improvement program, because that's actually what it is. Planned replacement leaves us open to the ambiguity of planned where, planned by the department, planned by whomever. So unless there's resistance on that, I had a moment to, I had the enviable position of summarizing workflow and database workflow and timeline last meeting. And also explaining the work of an esteemed panel, town manager and the finance director and our group, flashing back in time when we set this all up. Now that I'm not doing that, I had a chance to look at the changes we were talking about. I'm going to make a suggestion that we eliminate minor improvement efficiency and effectiveness. We encapsulate that in improves efficiency and effectiveness. And by eliminating both major and minor, what happens is this becomes a valuation proposition. So you can score it as major or minor by giving it a higher number, just as you can score your interpretation of whether it actually accomplishes an improvement of efficiency and effectiveness by giving it a higher lower score. The benefit of that is not only does it eliminate an incongruency in how members wanted to proceed, but it allows us to add, very simply, a line item, which is the valuation of cost is appropriate, which seemed to me to be an important element in our process. And Christie, I think, well, it was either Christie or Howard who brought it up. So one of you two gentlemen.
Could you repeat what you just said, please?
So basically, if we remove, I'm gonna go back super briefly to the structure of the database. If we modify the structure, it's a major lift we don't have time for. So if we eliminate, if we encapsulate major and minor improvements
Right.
into one, then we have a free line.
That's clear.
The most appropriate concept that came up in our discussion in the category cost was valuation of the request, the cost is appropriate. So what I'm suggesting is, instead of having in this line item minor improvement efficiency effectiveness, we have in this, that line item is valuation of cost is appropriate. Now, we can modify that concept, we can make it more fine-tuned, but what we're saying is the cost appropriate. The proposed cost, and that's obviously in our own interpretation based upon the documents that are provided by the department head, but also, you know, what we see here on the street, so on and so forth. Christie.
Just a thought on that. I do like the change. I think that's a version of this, I think would be great. But for our sake, you know, none of us are specialists in the pricing out of a dump truck or a sewer main. And I'm just trying to sort of put the two together and think somehow for my purpose, and you know, for what I think what we do here, what might be a little bit closer to our charge is evaluation somehow equates to the material that was brought before us. I'm trying to sort of visualize this a little bit because valuation of cost is appropriate. You understand what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
exactly. So, and actually, I was thinking of it more along the lines. Well, I was thinking along both lines. What you're saying is the cost is appropriate, that is with respect to the documentation that's been provided.
Yeah, somewhat.
And-
I'm trying to find a way
Yeah,
to make that be relevant because, you know, I'm not a specialist on the cost of a rig or a piece of
Sure.
equipment or something at the sewer, like a new filtration system. But what I do know is I can look at the material that was presented to us and determine if that's equatable to what they're asking for. I don't have a solution. I'm just throwing that into the mix for us to ponder.
yeah, no, I get it. Let's brainstorm and then we'll come up with no problem
That's all.
about a solution. Howard?
I think if you feel uncomfortable or lacking in the information that's been provided to you, it behooves you and us to be asking for that information to get it to be to the 100% before we vote on it.
Yeah.
So I don't know that scoring this is valid or valuable, but I do think your point is we better make sure that we're comfortable with what we've got.
Yeah, I guess maybe I sum it up and say this is actually a good summary of what we are trying to do.
Yeah, and I
Let's
think,
just go back to it and say, you know, we've been doing this been doing town committees since 2002. So, and we've, you know, been voting on all of this stuff. So I'm fine to leave it the way it is. I think I understand what it's doing. I was just trying to throw in a little component of more of how we look at things.
I agree with you. I thought that, but we should ask for more information.
yeah, I think that it's fair. I think it's both fair and appropriate and a point well taken. And when we, you know, I'll work up a little definition on this. And when we get into the Rory review, before we do a Rory's, we're gonna have a meeting. We're gonna kind of go through each of the line items and how to use the Rory and how to use the search and so on and so forth.
You have a couple of hands up, by the way.
Okay, but I just want to,
Yeah.
and I'll get to this in 1 second. The idea here is that, the cost is appropriate with the valuation of cost is appropriate with respect to the information we've received. On a subjective level, and it's a trailer concept, trailing, like a tail is trailing, is the opportunity for a member to say, well, you know what, as a point of discussion, it's a line item. I'm a little concerned about this. It's X amount of dollars, and I'm not seeing the cost value proposition here, and I'd like to have a discussion on it. We haven't really had a line item reminder of that, and I think it's relevant, certainly relevant to our purview. And I think it's relevant as kind of a reminder when we're going through these, maybe not necessarily to have a group discussion, but at least for individuals to say, what does this mean? And how am I applying it? So I think it's a kind of a multifaceted potential line item, but the primary one is the information we're providing, does it coincide? Does it kind of pass the smell test, if you will, oversimplify it? Brooke and then PJ.
So I would just say, it feels to me, having listened to town meeting, there's a question of, does this investment at this cost feel like it has value to the community? Not necessarily value as to the actual cost of it, but a more sort of amorphous kind of value. Do you perceive the value of the project as worth the cost as outlined? And I don't know whether that's what we're trying to get at, which is more a qualitative analysis rather than a quantitative analysis that might reflect how the voters look at these when they come before them. Like, is this worth it to me as a taxpayer?
Thanks, Brooke. And I think that's very valid. And I think to me that part of that is, that's part of, a more specific part of does it pass the smell test with respect to context of the community. I think the best thing to do here, and then PJ, I'm gonna get to you in a sec, is I just want to kind of hit these as we go, is to, I think we address this in the definition or the goal of the line item. So it's got, basically at this point, 3 different aspects to it. PJ?
A couple things, and sorry if I ramble. Brooke, good point on qualitative versus quantitative. So I understand a line item that would say, is at this much cost, is this worth it, for the community or to pursue? That, to your point, is great, would be qualitative. Certainly think that a line item that addresses that would be valuable. I mean, the way this reads to me, and that we kind of see issues with in a lot of requests, is essentially, is the estimate supported by documentation within the request? So are there quotes for the dump truck? Are there budgets for the construction? Sometimes we get very in-depth documentation that substantiates or supports what they're asking for. Sometimes we get a little bit, and sometimes we get a blank screen that says placeholder. So I don't know if that's also what this is trying to solve, because obviously it would incentivize department heads to provide as much documentation as they can, knowing that a line item is based on, how detailed the estimates of the costs are. And different requests are going to, have a different spectrum of how much documentation might be required to meet 100%. But I think that obviously also is correlated to how complicated and probably how high cost those projects are. A F-150 would probably be a quote from a whatever auto dealership, and a $10 million housing project would require a litany of budgets and additional backup documentation. And then my only critique with the title of it, valuation of cost, is kind of an odd way to it kind of leads me to wonder exactly what we're looking for, whether it should be estimate of cost or whether it should be backup documentation of cost. But valuation of cost almost seems redundant, because if you're buying something, essentially the value of it monetarily is what you're paying for it at that time. So that's kind of a side note.
Okay, so I'm going to just hit those quickly. Peter, I'll get to that last comment in a moment. So your comment part, I think, is with respect to valuation, is there sufficient information to substantiate cost? I think that's applicable. I think this line item covers it. The second, is it worth it for the community with respect to the overall cost and goals of the community? That was a dirty summary of Brooke's comment. And does it reflect value to cost? One word with one term with hyphens, value to cost for service or use. So that would be a ratio. So for me, the concept was, I understand Peter's point, but the concept for me is that you can do, you know, as a, using the term assessment of cost, I guess we could say, but valuation of cost seems to me to encompass a variety of topics because we're subjectively valuating, we're a cost. We're evaluating whether these three items, we're evaluating the cost with respect to, is there documentation to make an appropriate determination? Is there, is it worthwhile with respect to community goals, select board agenda, so on and so forth? And then the last one, what is the value of this versus the cost, period, in and of itself? Christian, please.
I was just gonna say, if you add an E in front of the evaluation, does that make sense more?
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm fine with that. If you
Yeah, it would for me. Yeah, just when I think of valuation, I think of a dollar amount. I think of trying to come up with a value, a monetary value of something. And when you're talking
Right.
about cost and a value of what you're buying, they're kind of the same thing. So evaluation,
Good.
if it incorporates all those other things, would make more sense.
No, that's great. That's the banker in you. Brooke?
I mean,
So I'm a little concerned that we're trying to wrap too many things in one phrase and that it's going to be different for different people. I think we should pick a lane, one or the other. Either we're evaluating the value, as it were, to the community, or we're assessing whether the information we receive effectively is
supports the
effective
request
in
amount.
it supports the request amount. I would go that way
Both.
and leave my qualitative one out and get, because I think what we're doing is we're doing what confused the heck out of me when I first started this, is trying to do multiple things with one line. And I would like to get away from that, even if it means we exclude half of what's being discussed here.
Then I think we would need to, I understand your point, and I don't necessarily disagree. I'm kind of more aligned with having this be trying to capture more in evaluation is better than less, and to some extent, but if we proceed the way that Brooke outlined, which I'm happy to pursue facilitating the meeting, what we need to do is vote on which one we're including. Howard.
I don't, like any of the three of them for different reasons. Of course, one of them is, on what basis are we deciding that it's, that the community is gonna like the project relative to what it costs? The second one is cost benefit analysis. Who are we to say on a substantive, on a non-objective basis, whether this scores high or not on a cost benefit basis, because we don't really have a basis to evaluate that. And the third point is,
Can you restate that?
yes, on what basis would we, because it's a subjective scoring, would we be able to determine the cost versus the benefit to give it a score? How do we know? You know, so, and then the third point is, if we feel like we didn't get proper financial backup for this, then shame on us. Then we should be asking for it.
Sure. Brooke? Your hand's still up, or?
Yeah, I just think to the point, I think it's a way. I hear you, Howard. So your point would be take it out altogether. Don't do anything with this one.
Or let's noodle on, maybe if you feel like you need a third item, let's go back and can reconsider. But none of the three of them are particularly useful. They're all subjective, or and they are kind of based on information that we couldn't objectively evaluate.
I want to push back on that in a minute, Barry.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I understand what you're saying is, yeah, in an environment where everything has to be quantified in terms of what the cost is for it. I get it, but I think there are certain things in our community, and believe me, I hate ambiguous type things like this. But there are certain things that the tangible value of it versus what it means to the community become two very separate things. Henceforth, let's look at the fountain downtown. Okay. From a benefit standpoint, and how much it's going to cost and all that, I'd have a tough time justifying it based upon that. But given the feedback from the community, though, it's like the weighting of it takes on a very different thing. There are resources that are available under which to do it. Holly Backus, who's out of Plus, she is our preservation specialist. And so if it came to one of those things, it's like, I don't see the inherent value on it, but somehow I feel like there's something that the community is looking for out of it. She'd probably be the person I turn to help quantify what that really is. Whereas, the gut sentiment of getting the damn thing done versus what the actual cost is could be two very separate things. So I'm not keen on the terms, but I'm keen on where it's taking me. Does that maybe put a different perspective to things?
It does, but the points that you raised, Barry, are important, but they show up elsewhere, not in the cost category. Like they might show up in the culture, legacy, preservation category.
I'm sorry. I thought that's where we were. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I'm running late too.
Oh, no, but you know what? We're in the cost category and.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry.
Steven?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, you should tell him what we've decided and where we are.
Right,
'cause
so
he doesn't know.
I'm gonna back, well, first, I wanna say a couple quick things on this before we lose track of it. I'm making the point without being pointed. Howard, you asked, who are we to act on these things subjectively? We are the capital program committee.
But
Please,
that's the whole Rory score.
let me finish, please. We are taking a set of, we are systematizing criteria in order to transparently apply subjective valuations based upon through our own lens of experience and knowledge, which is part of the value of this, because I'm oversimplifying this, and I'm not oversimplifying it to establish a position, but I think it illustrates the position. Otherwise, I mean, we could use ChatGPT, like literally to rank these things more programmatically using artificial intelligence. We are looking for individuals' input. I want to get back to the point Brooke had made, and then I'll back us into what we're actually talking about again, is the idea of too broad a stroke. Actually, now I'm hearing other people's comments. It does make sense to me. I think the comment Howard made about does it reflect the cost, the value to cost ratio? Or no, I'm sorry, the comment you made about, is the information provided appropriate?
That was Peter's comment. But
Yeah, I think that can come out of this, perhaps, because that is part of this, that's just part of our duty.
it's a scope.
It's a process oriented versus a
Right.
value oriented. And I think if we're using it as a value metric, it is penalizing a department who
Right.
doesn't provide it, but we can accomplish the same goal in a different way with it being less confusing.
Mhm.
So I think Peter's pointing out something that's been going on for a number of years, and I understand, the bit of frustration there. So then it comes down to the other two, but before I get into the other two, Barry, where we are with this is we've determined that on the scoring valuation where, can you see the screen? Where major improvement, efficiency and effectiveness, so minor improvement, efficiency and effectiveness. What I propose today is we combine those two. We change it to improves efficiency and effectiveness, the valuation occurs within the 0 to 100%. Whether it's minor, whether it's major, whether you think it's applicable or not, it covers a lot of ground. What that does is it solves for this being 10% and this automatically being 100%, which was a concern of membership. It solves for a couple of other concerns that were points well taken. At the same time, the result is that when we eliminate this field, that creates a problem with the SQL, the SQL database programming, both in terms of workflow and in terms of the timeline to modify the structure of the database and the reports. So instead, the idea is to add a concept that came up at the last meeting, which is more simply, was the cost appropriate? We've modified valuation because it has different meaning for different people to, at this point, for the sake of discussion, we've modified this to evaluation. And then that brings us up to where we are in the discussion now. So I think to facilitate, I'd like to restate the two that seem to be on the table and see if folks wanna, we can resolve whether one or both of those are appropriate. The two that are on the table are, and again, this has a subjective evaluation based on our own experience in the community. For instance, we were well informed at town meeting based on different discussions. I think more appropriately and more accurately informed based upon the ballot of how some costs are interpreted by the wider community. We also have the select board strategic plans. We have other initiatives to balance this again. But is it worth it for the community with respect to the overall cost? In our opinion. Number two, does it reflect a value to cost, a reasonable value, a reasonable cost to value ratio for the service or use it's proposed for? Now, we can use both or none, or we can go from there, but that's what we've been discussing. Who'd like to jump in?
I mean, if I could just,
Christie.
it is, I mean, the addition of this does give us really an opportunity to, it's kind of a grade on a presentation, a little bit, on the material provided. So that is, to me, that's a benefit. Normally I like things to be a little bit aligned, but I do like a little bit of flexibility in this one, I think. I like to think to myself, what kind of benefit is this to the community, and think about that cost-wise, but I also think it is relative to presentation and the material that we're provided to approve a certain amount. So I'm kind of in the middle, really.
Would changing this title to evaluation of the appropriateness of cost, these are just notes that I cribbed in when I was working on this. I'm not married to these, there's no private authorship. Trying to capture this as we go.
I think that's a great change, but I certainly don't appreciate how to put a score to that in any case.
I know, I want to give you something to argue with me during the meetings.
We always agree on everything. That's just not.
We just get to it in a different way at a different point, but we often do. So evaluation of appropriateness.
Keep in mind, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Keep in mind, Howard, we're advisory. We're not making rule.
Yeah.
We're providing.
Bear, I'll get you next.
We're charged with looking at data, talking to the right people, and we're providing advisory data for the people that are making those decisions that you're talking about.
And they're the ones that are gonna look at the absolute Rory score that we're providing it based on all of our input to put a number next to that and rank these things. But
Because we're doing our due diligence.
I don't have a problem with
Yeah, yeah.
that, but in the we're in the cost category right now.
Can I correct you on that though? Because I may have misinterpreted you, but they don't actually look at the Rory number.
Well,
They look at our final recommendation.
that's fine, but
We use the Rory as a tool to transparently rank these so that there aren't pet projects
Right.
being advanced.
and the result is effectively the same.
Yeah.
But in the cost category, how are we gonna score that? I mean, it seems a bit nebulous.
Well, I think it is a little bit nebulous, but I think look, the idea here is first of all, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's a relatively low overall percentage of the total that you can score out of 100%. Two, what it does is it opens up an avenue for consideration that we have not explicitly included. And what we're doing is we're defining it by two different definitions, which is problematic, I can see. But the question is, then I'm trying to pose to you, and then Barry, I'm sorry, and then PJ, are we looking to reasonably extend the latitude in our scoring on this topic, how it can be easily interpreted when you read the line item, to encompass those two interpretations, or do we want it to be a very strict interpretation for one specific outcome? Before anyone answers, Barry's been waiting patiently, and then PJ.
Yeah, thank you. On that one particular category, the evaluation of appropriateness of cost, I mean, it almost begs itself to say yes or no to it. I hear what Howard's saying. It's very tough to, say, well, I mean, maybe if you were to compare it across the spectrum of all the other projects, but left to its own devices, is it appropriate of the cost? Yes or no? The other question I just want to make sure is the four categories that you have listed here right now, all of those are scored independent of each other. It's not if I pick one, it eclipses everything else in the other categories, correct?
Yeah, the category of cost is valued relative to the other categories, and then these are valued relative as a percentage of the percentage that cost is a value to the whole.
All right. I maybe need to hear that a different way. Like the very first continuity A system, if I used to break that up according to what I thought was appropriate, but you told me after my first year that if I put 33% in that upper category, everything else is eclipsed over that. It just becomes an automatic 100%.
Right, so we changed that. And so how this one would work, Barry, is cost, let's say cost is of four categories, cost is 25% of the whole.
Sure.
And then we just happen to think that each of the subcategories, so the line items, being these two and these two, we determine they're of equal value. So these are each 25% of 25% of the whole. And then you score these independent of one another. We'll go back to the point you were making earlier, and I can address that for you before we move on to other stuff.
Okay.
I'd like to suggest PJ, and then I'm gonna suggest a modification with a straight through. PJ?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to generally speaking, because a lot of the conversation on these different categories come down to whether or not we're all going to kind of be able to interpret them and land in the same place. I've always seen us as a cross-section representative of the community in a whole based on our interactions and discussions with all the voting public. So I think, knowing that we're going to be voting or inputting our Rory value differently based on our perception of, what the community is looking for, whether or not something's valuable to the community based on our exposure to and conversations with the community, we're not always going to get to the same place. And I think that's kind of the goal of these Rorys, is to take our individual perceptions of what, is what the community is looking for, whether or not something's worth it cost-wise, whether or not, culturally, whatever it might be, inputting our own, and the Rory, algorithm, so to speak, does the work to compile that into one value. And so I don't want to lose sight of that, because I think there's a lot of things where we're saying, well, we're never all going to be able to interpret that the same way, or we're never all going to be able to, get to the same decision on that. And I don't think that's necessarily the point. And I could be mistaken with that, and maybe we're trying to get away from that, but that's always kind of been the goal of this process, and as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, PJ. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that kind of better states what I had commented on earlier, with having some latitude within a line item. The utility for me, for us to include, is it worth it? Is it worth it for the community with respect to the overall cost? And separately, which is very different, is does it reflect a value to cost ratio appropriately for the service or use? I like the idea of putting them both in there, because in the next iteration of modifications, we can always add granularity. And we've identified, we can argue the semantics of the 2 points, but we seem to have consensus that both of those appropriateness of cost metrics are of value. We put them in this year, they're noted in the definition, and then next year we make a change. If we're adding more granularity, this line item would have 2 subcategories, and they would be the 2 topics that we've been discussing. And then if we felt it was worthwhile, and at that point we could be assigning values to them. Personally, I think it's too much. Like, when do you stop with the level of granularity? It's if we were in austerity budget times, it would be useful, but I don't think we're looking for that level of precision that we would need to do it. With all that said, I don't see any hands, and we're well into the meeting. We've got a bunch to do. So it seems like, is there anyone opposed to including at this point in time both of the 2 we landed on, and having the concept of, is there sufficient information to determine whether the cost is appropriate? Have that be separate and just be part of our process.
So what are the 2?
The 2 would be, reading 3 different sets of notes here. Quote unquote, is it worth it for the community with respect to overall cost? Number 1. 2, does it reflect cost to value ratio?
Cost benefit.
For the intended service or use. Appropriately.
Is
it
the
an
cost
appropriate ratio?
aligned with the benefit?
Yeah, that's even better. Cost align with benefit. Any strong pushback on those?
I'm abstaining.
Well, if you vote in the affirmative, you can always you can be on the vote recall.
Oh,
So we learned that at town meeting, right?
Did you know that?
I forgot about that.
I'm teasing.
You're right.
Okay.
This doesn't rise to that.
Well, this is the other thing. Guys, let's keep in mind, if we change this to simply appropriateness of cost, we can hammer this out a little bit more.
Yeah,
Before we start doing Rory's, like the definition isn't gonna be coded. The line item is.
we got, either way you look at it, it's better than what was there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
I have a question.
Yep.
Stephen, can I ask a question?
Yep.
On improves efficiency and effectiveness?
Yeah.
Other than, what does not improve efficiency and effectiveness?
Well, you might have like I think that's a very good question. I know.
I'm just trying to think, is it a lead in, is the question led in already by an answer? I mean,
PJ?
I mean, wouldn't it be more to what extent does it improve efficiency and effectiveness? I mean, I've usually always seen it as, it could be a little bit, and it could be, which would be a 25%, and it could be a major improvement, and it could be 100%.
Right, and how the example that illustrates that is, say we've got a a dump truck. And it's an old dump truck. And not only is it an old dump truck, it's a two-wheel drive dump truck. And the plow frame is bent. The new 10-ton dump truck will haul more while going the same miles. And it has double duty as a functional plow truck.
Yeah.
So for me, that's a major improvement of effect.
Okay.
And then I might rank that 100, where if it was just a dump truck without the plow frame, I might, and it was supposed to be for winter work, I might say 50%.
Yeah, okay,
Just an example.
yeah, based on the request, whatever the request is for.
Yeah.
If someone's ordering plow, it's for a plow, if not, it's not. But, it just seems like improves efficiency and effectiveness. It doesn't, it rarely allows me some variation on what I'm gonna score, because it's always basically yes.
Well, but the score is, see, I wanna go, Barry had mentioned a bit. These aren't yes, no, these are gradation. Every line is made, let's use a black pen.
Yeah.
That black is made of different values of white and black. There's gray areas, and those gray areas are in the valuation where we can assign, is it a 10% improvement in efficiency and effectiveness? Is it 100%? And then again, that allows us to apply our own knowledge base, our own level of experience. The part of the utility in that aspect is that we all get to see the Rory values when we're sitting here, or we get to see our own and we get to see the group. And if ours is 100, say PJ's ranks a particular request 100 on this particular line item, and I ranked it at 0, I may say, hey, you know what? And the result is it's a higher number in the group. I may say, wait a minute, did I miss something here, or do I understand this differently than the group? And then it creates a discussion point. So that's part of the utility in these not being utilized as yes, no, because if we just use yes, no, it eliminates a variety of utility.
So I'm not proposing yes, no. I'm proposing a question that, that really challenges efficiency and effectiveness. I get it.
Beyond the scope of this discussion.
Yeah.
No, I mean, what would you, I think, what I'm trying to say, I'm joking. But I think it's fair to say, you're bringing up a concern, what are you proposing as a solution?
I don't have one.
I mean,
No, it's more of a discussion point. It's just one of those, line items that, to me,
here, let me give you another.
I like questions that offer me an opportunity to say it does not, or it does, in the range that we are allowed ourselves.
But you're really going back to, is it a yes, no? You're
Well,
fighting. with that.
so what this question is really, this question is saying, yes, this request is going to improve effectiveness and efficiency. How much do you think it's gonna?
Well,
So do you know what I'm saying?
I
guess,
do, but
yeah.
don't forget, if you put a 0 in there, the answer is no. It didn't.
Yeah.
In your mind, it doesn't. So let me give you another example of where it would. Is, let me give you an example where it doesn't. Dionysus Beach bathrooms get rebuilt to the exact same standard. No change in improvements in effectivity or efficiency. It may be in terms of the aesthetic, but as a value proposition of the cost relative to use, there's no change. That's a 0. Harbor Master building. Bigger building, better bathrooms, better facilities for people who really need those because they're overnighting on their boat, they're anchoring, better office space, so on and so forth. Major improvement, scores higher on the scale. It would score on the scale, so it's a yes. And by virtue of our own subjective interpretation of the materials provided, our experience down there, and so on and so forth, that would be where we rank it on the scale. So I think that, I get what you're saying, but I think you can say no just by putting a 0 on it.
All right.
Mhm.
Yeah, fine with that.
Okay, no, I'm glad we're having the discussion, it's important. I'm just also trying to keep in mind that I've booked us out for a few more of these meetings, and, because we are putting some time into them. So you guys are just gonna, Please be aware of that, and, the more rapidly we go through these, the fewer meetings, but I think it's important we go through these at the level of detail we are. Barry?
Yeah, wordsmithing time. Do you think it would be better to switch the word appropriateness to something like justifiability? So is it appropriate? It can, as opposed to, can you justify the cost? And put it, does that help maybe achieve a better ability to rank it? As opposed to like a yes, no? Just, we can skip past that and let people digest as well.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I think, yeah, that brings up mixed feelings for me.
Okay.
Both sides of the fence, so let me, as Howard said, noodle on that.
Yeah, I just want to worry, wouldn't add that. It's a technical banking.
Yeah, I would never, that's a new vocabulary word for me. Barry, what we're gonna do here is, I just wanna very quickly. Okay,
It's good to see it.
Barry, you missed out on this, so, at the last meeting, thank you, Christie,
Yeah, you bet.
appreciate your input.
Yeah, you got
See you, Christy.
Bye, you guys. Thank you.
Barry, there were two aspects to ops to these three, and I'll ask that you indulge me by not having to read them. High, medium, and low have a different nature and a different, relationship in scoring relative to one another. So for instance, if it's high, it's also medium and low with the extent to, if this represents a value, continuity A was 25% of the overall, it would be, if the rationale we previously utilized was that if you scored high and you don't put 100% in medium and low, or you scored medium and you don't put 100% low, that you're actually penalizing the request and taking away from the nature of the scoring. Now, that wasn't the case with required, recommended, or elective. So what we're doing is we're getting away from high, medium, and low based on our discussion at the last meeting. And we're going to change this line item to required to maintain necessary functions. The next is required to meaningfully prevent degradation of functions. And the third is allows for enhancement of functions not required. The expense, it's not a requirement of the functions to provide the functions. We run into a character restraint on these. Now, the result of that is we have a more precise understanding of what these three line items mean, number one. And number two, we will score these individually. There won't be, if this is a 10, this is 100, and this is 100. It will be, this is scored individual of this and this and this. The last point I want to make is we need to be cognizant if we're doing a looking backward on, for instance, a request that is recurring, that we are degrading the overall points, total of high value of points that a request can receive, because we're removing these percentages as children of one of the primary, okay? So
I love it.
yeah, okay, and that was a big, I had a chance to kind of think through that over the weekend. We got all that squared away. The other one we did is we're changing this to read heritage, tradition, legacy, semicolon, culture. That information is basically heritage, tradition, legacy are essentially the same thing. And culture is a more specific and different with respect to what it is we're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Scheduled replacement, we changed to planned replacement. Planned, the idea was scheduled is loaded with ambiguity. Planned is also loaded with ambiguity. And the idea is that what we have always been attempting to accomplish is to communicate to a department head that a replacement, if it is a replacement, that it's something that's accounted for within the capital improvement plan. Now, obviously, the first year, it won't be in the capital improvement plan, but it will be thereafter, and therefore they get some points towards forward-looking and planning, and it's communicated by them to them because they see there's a point differentiation. I'm just explaining it to you, and then PJ? Here.
Me?
Yeah, got your hand up.
Yep. So scheduled replacement in this regard, or under the new title, it seems similar in a sense to the discussion that we had with the sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. The issue that we had with whether or not department head was providing backup for their cost estimation. So it seems binary. So isn't it pretty obvious that it's either they have accounted for it within their SIP or they haven't? And really, I don't see what the gradient's going to be in the middle for us to make an informed, Rory decision. It's kind of either has it been on your SIP in the past or has it not?
So I agree with you. Just to respond to that, to me, it's a yes or no, but the yes has points.
It's agreed, but okay, I get that. But so the yes would be 100, the no would be 0. I mean, I'm trying to see a scenario where there would be a 30 or a 50 or a 70.
I don't know. It may be that I can't think of an example of that, but for me, the concept is more we're providing a way to incent by valuation within the RORI, which is really what steers our decision making on making recommendations on a particular request and requests relative to one another. We're providing an ability to incentivize a replacement being accounted for within the capital improvement program.
Okay. And so with regards to backup of cost estimates, I guess to that point in real time, you could say, hey, we know you want this year, go as something to substantiate the cost of this request, whereas whether or not something has been reflected in their SIP plan is kind of retroactive and they can't go backwards in time, so they could just get a lower score.
Yeah, they get a lower score on that, but if it went to an out year, then for me, the value of this is, well, first of all, it's a relatively low percentage overall, but what it's doing is it's ticking up a request that somebody put into the system. Now, they put into the system prior. So for instance, say you have a department that goes through the exercise of looking at how quickly its vehicles are worn down for whatever reason, and they put in a 5-year plan, and that's reflected within the SIP. That to me gets a reward. So it may be a new request, it may be a new request to us, but it was already submitted in the SIP. Like it's submitted to finance. So we may say, hey, on this one, one of the pieces of supplemental data may be the department submitting their schedule of replacements, including this vehicle. And therefore it's part of the consideration of the SIP plan by finance and the spreadsheet in the 5-year outlook. So in that instance, they come in 2023, they have a vehicle every year. Let's say it's the same vehicle that the request, they have 4 vehicles that are the same vehicle types, make, model, and the rest. Each year they're coming in and they're requesting one of those vehicles. It's a new request, but it's going to score 100 because they put it in the SIP. Now, somebody else might come in and it's the exact same vehicle and we only have enough money for one vehicle that year and they didn't put it in the SIP. Their score is going to be lower by a function of this having received a 0. The idea being it incentivizes proper, future planning.
Right. So in the same way, it incentivizes people to build it into their SIP, I guess that's more of a long-term process as opposed to the cost estimates for a singular request, because my theory was to incentivize people to provide as much, substantiating documentation for their request. But to Howard's point, we just tell people going forward, if we're not going to have that category, hey, if you haven't provided substantiating documentation for the cost of your request, go and get it, or else we're not going to entertain the request in general, it sounds like.
Yeah, Peter, look what happened at the town meeting with the Public Works building. Some dude up and said, I don't know what the $5 million is for.
Certainly, and I think that's a lot of where our impression of
study
what
for
people are
2000.
willing to absorb comes from, and
Right.
how we would, if we said, hey, you didn't provide any backup, so it's going to score low, then everybody else at town meeting has the same thought. That kind of shows that we're, representing the constituents appropriately. But okay, great. Just wanted to make sure I was clear on the distinction between scheduled replacement, which could be kind of binary, and not having a requirement in Rory for documentation supporting cost estimates. Got it.
No, that makes perfect sense. And then the other reason we pulled scheduled out of there, and again, it can be in a later iteration, is that it means different, it has different definitions on different levels of the process.
Mhm.
And also with respect to different capital assets. So as opposed to having that very broad, multifaceted potential value, applicability, weighing in on how we individually value the request, it was simpler just to remove scheduled. It's been a perennial discussion, and it just seemed like it made sense, just for informational purposes. Again, in future iterations, we might put scheduled in, and it would have subcategories, but again, what's the return on that? That level of precision, is it really helping us? I can foresee in austerity budget times it would, but in the meantime, I'm not seeing it. Any questions on any of those? Comments? So you seeing anything structural that with these? Okay, and if you do, I mean, I think you know me well enough to know, please comment. I'm not soliciting direct input from you on a lot of these, because they're, committee level policy discussion, but I certainly always welcome your input, and I just want to be clear about that. Current request, so this is the group. First of all, let me get an idea from you all, how much longer we have, because we have a quorum currently.
I'm probably good for maybe 15 more.
Okay. Well, then that,
Maybe.
I want to tackle, let's see if we get through this quickly. Current new requests, we've discussed. We want to have some additional information with a, being the customized alphanumeric, so that we can get a better handle on them out of the door, understanding what year they are versus having confusion there with a particular request, because the description is similar to something we've seen in the recent past or in the distant past. That is really nothing we need to be dealing with now. It's just got to be conveyed and worked through with finance and Plum. Current request is a prior request brought forward, substantively unchanged. Again, it would be, this relates to cloning. Cloning is the first step on the back end. The next step is, as Sue has volunteered, will be inputting data, and she will be inputting what the modifications are, so that there's in our review, we understand how these relate to how this request relates to a past request. And current request is a revised prior request. Oh, no, I'm sorry, current request is a prior request, substantively unchanged. This is the one with substantive modifications. This would be where there is additional information explaining to us what the difference is. Iterative requests, I'm not going to get into this chunk of density right here. It's a philosophical and policy discussion with respect to some of these labels. I think the three I'd like to focus on, we had bunched scheduled under this. Scheduled has, again, a variety of different meanings depending on the context. We're looking at these three as a method of categorization, and in the naming convention, as opposed to a method of valuing. These aren't line items. These are new data that would show up in the alphanumeric. So you could look at sewer 2015, number 1, PRS, and you would know that for whatever the dump truck, you would know that this was PRS is a phase recurring, and there's also a supplemental component. That's simply what we're trying to accomplish here, is getting a handle on a request from its alphanumeric code. Where I'm not suggesting we're gonna do this multiple levels out, so for instance, if there's a recurring request 3 years in a row, we have 3 Rs or a superscript, cubed or anything. It's just gonna be a simple annotation within the alphanumeric. Are there thoughts? Well, first of all, are there any questions on what we mean? I'm using the, for these words, I'm intending them to mean what we've typically used in the past. Phased is that it is a request that has multiple phases. It is not a different scope of work that really is a different request.
So why don't you just write phase scope of work?
Well, because we can do that, but it's gonna be, I'm happy to do that.
Because that's what you mean.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm using, the words that I'm trying to define.
Phased project, phased
Phased
expenditure,
scope
phased scope of project.
Recurring is that, the scope of work is recurring. Supplemental is that it is a request, in addition to a prior established scope of work. Any concerns about those?
What do you plan to do with scheduled?
Gonna bring that up next. That's why I wanted to get through these 3 first, because if you think about it as a level, let's bear with me. The reason it's crossed off is it's actually it's really a separate category. It's not an iterative request. Phased is iterative, recurring is iterative, supplemental is iterative. This is scheduled it has a different connotation. It's also, at this point, without granularity of scheduled, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, because it's loaded. It's loaded in that it means different things in different contexts. That leads to confusion. Creating a means to identify scheduled cells by identifying scheduled in the alphanumeric, what problem are we solving for? Now, I'm not saying scheduled with respect to valuation. I'm saying scheduled with respect to a category. What problem are we solving for if we include scheduled? Open the floor.
If I were to replace those words, I would have included end of useful life in scheduled. So it's scheduled due to end of useful life.
And you're suggesting that first of all, as a category or evaluation?
I was modifying the words in scheduled.
Okay, and again, are you suggesting that with respect to categorization or with respect to a value, like a line item for valuation?
Well, is scheduled a line item or not?
No, I'm trying to get an understanding what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, I think it's one of those, it's another choice of the 4. It's the 5th choice.
Okay, and then I'm gonna go back to my original question is if we include this schedule as part of the alphanumeric, what problem are we solving for?
We're just knowing that it's because the fire truck is gonna be is not gonna be fully operable, useful in that year that we're trying to have it delivered.
Would you restate that for me?
Replacing something that's fully depreciated or no longer useful, can't function to its required capabilities.
Okay, I'm gonna open that up to you guys. Scheduled, well, any of those. I kind of like knock out the first 3 if we can, given Peter's gonna be heading out of here and the schedule continues to the next meeting. Does anyone have any concerns with adding whatever we end up with, P, R, and S on the alphanumeric, the custom alphanumeric for request?
Recurring. I mean, I'm fine as long as we have, explanation of what each corresponds to.
Right. Okay, and then these would be in the my Rory table and in the
Yeah.
SIP table, and we could, in the custom field, and it just gives you a handle on them. Okay, Howard is talking about scheduled. As a add-on to the alphanumeric
Obsolete.
obsolescence. Am I saying that right?
I think it's a word, right?
Yeah.
Obsolescence.
Obsolescence, I believe it is. I have a lot of reader errors, I'm not an educated
Oh, look at,
person.
it came up.
Because he uses a lot.
I think that's not spelled right.
I would say OBLESSION.
Sue, I'm getting that look, you're thinking. no.
OBLE.
There we go, I knew it was a word. I know the name, I just can't spell it
How do you spell
with an O.
it? Oh, obsolete.
It says, hey, Excel says I'm good to go. So now, okay, now that we've renamed it, let's remove the strike through for the sake of discussion. I wish there was a shortcut key for that. I've got a program in the toolbar.
There's, yeah, if your toolbar is at the top, there's a button there.
Yeah, I just can't get at it without. So what are, I mean, I'm asking because I'm having a problem with the value model, the value of this in the
Well,
alphanumeric.
remember when they came to us with the fire truck and they said that they didn't have the basket,
Right.
and therefore it didn't serve their purpose.
So let me push back a little bit, just because the reason I'm having difficulty with it is I see this under. Sorry. I see this being addressed under these line items. Required to maintain necessary
I
function.
thought you were coming up with some coding for the summary schedule, am I wrong?
It is for the summary schedule.
So it's not, it might be measured there, but you're putting a notation on the summary schedule.
So you're thinking, okay, I'm sorry, I am mixing categorization and valuation. But, okay.
I mean, I'd kind of like to know, yeah, the equipment that we have doesn't work anymore.
Okay, no, it's fair enough.
You know, I'm just saying.
I'm just trying to I'm willing to be persuaded, or I don't have my mind changed. I'm just having a difficult time understanding the value of it. If we're utilizing this for reviewing vehicles, which is, I mean, I guess it could be utilized for, let's use the example of nothing on the Diana's bathrooms, they're fine. But that was brought up earlier as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Or the harbor masters, I guess it could be in there as an O.
Which is, to me, worth knowing because it makes it more important.
Guys, thoughts on that? Peter, you're muted.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. It's valuable to know whether or not something has deteriorated, whether from useful life or other reason. And that's, one of the reasons that it is less than fully useful, effective, and would, in theory, be a reason that I would support a replacement of something, or, a request.
And I would want to double check our SIP request form. I think there is a checkbox for a similar quality. And I want to see if it's there, because I wouldn't want to have this in the alphanumeric, but not have it reflected in the SIP request form, because it's, it's an important metric. But I'm at a loss at the moment of which checkbox it is, but I think there is a checkbox that addresses this too.
Well, let's just wait till your wisdom kicks in then.
Well, it's not really wisdom, it's so,
Which one were you referring to? I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry, I thought you were speaking and your mic was off.
Oh, no, I was gonna look it up because I have the screen open.
Okay, I'm sorry, yeah, I guess what we're trying to understand is, the point I'm making is that if the intent of capturing this quality is not already in the SIP request form, we need to have it in the SIP request form as a checkbox. But I believe we have a series of checkboxes, and this concept of obsolescence is included in under a different word. I just can't think of what it is. So I'm not suggesting we don't put it in as a naming convention, in the naming convention. I just think we need to be, if it's already in the SIP request form as a quality that we want to capture for informational purposes, we just want to have those coincide.
Right.
If it isn't in the SIP request form, we want to add a checkbox, which I'll document as an enhancement. That it is in the SIP request form for the department head to communicate. Make sense?
Totally.
If I get one of those today, I'm happy.
Because that's close to 4:15. That's why I said that.
Yes, I know. You're
I was also going to say, and Stephen, just to circle it around. So I mean, if something's checked as obsolescence, in theory, you know, that would impact our ranking of the prevent degradation continuity line item, you know, or one of the line items. I mean, that would seem to
Right.
directly, you know,
In
be
terms of
correlated
evaluation.
with.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. When we're scoring, yeah. I mean, if you would think if they have checked off obsolescence, it's a weird word.
Might be obsolescence.
It is.
Obsolescence.
No.
Then in theory, it should correlate with one of those three that we kind of just renamed, which helps to, you know,
No.
when we're working through the request form, then we're going to Aurora's. Do they think it's obsolete? If it is, then it must be, you know, degrading the service that it's providing. So, yeah, just comment.
Okay, that makes sense
If
to
it
me.
helps. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's worthwhile, and it also, it changes the meaning, like, these are not necessarily just iterative anymore, but it is, I think, a worthwhile one, so I
Yeah,
support
it
that.
helps clarify the other ones. So what's our work? Do we have a meeting next week and are we at a conclusion?
No, we have left to address this group here.
Okay,
So we have a meeting next week, and then we have a meeting the following week to finalize. We have a meeting next week, I believe, if, I've got to schedule back to Sue and Brian. So when you guys get a chance, and then I'll present to the group and we can have a discussion. And then, so next week we want to finalize the meeting, schedule. And we want to get these wrapped up, and then we're gonna have one more meeting to make sure everything is the way we want it before I send it in a final version. Before you, well, Peter, if you need to sign out, that's fine. Sue, I just wanted to mention, I put in the schedule a note, I think it was June 6th, that perhaps the appropriate parties remind the select board, NP and EDC, and the FinCom, who have liaison members or representatives here, that we need to hear from them before the end of the third week of June in order for our internal work processes to work with Plum. If for somebody changes for some reason and so on and so forth, so that the Rory value, when we sit down to do the Rorys, everything's in order already, that's all. So if you hadn't had a chance to look at the schedule, I mentioned that now, so you're aware of it.
I saw it, thank you.
Okay, cool, appreciate that. Are there any other thoughts on what we've covered? We'll get another chance to look at it. And then when we finalize this next week, hopefully I will put together I'll have it in a little clearer format. Notes cleaned up, and we'll circulate it so that at the final meeting, you all have the benefit of having looked at it. Make sense?
Yeah.
Another makes sense, and it's 4:16, so you're gonna say yes.
yes, so of course, yes.
Excellent. All right, I appreciate everybody's time. We will meet next Thursday at the same time, hybrid, and I believe it's here at the trailer. If it's available. If not, we'll let you know via email. And with that, I get a motion to adjourn.
Last note before we do, I may or may not be available for next Thursday, just to put it on the record.
Okay, if you can't be here, make sure one of the other members is, so we have a quorum.
I will pass the baton.
Thank you.
Yes.
As vice chair, I'm relying on you to do that.
Okay, I will pound the pavement.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Hmm.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
PJ, on your motion.
Second.
Barry,
Bye.
Howard, and I'm an aye. Okay, thanks, everyone.
All right,
Thanks, guys.
thanks.